Hel- Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining me today, this Monday. I so appreciate you being here with me. It means a lot that you would take time out of your day and spend it. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about harnessing, the power of intrinsic motivation and how that really impacts team dynamics. Sometimes I talk oftentimes about how leaders can show up and finding passion and purpose within our leadership and how we can kind of reach that next level in our leadership and the goals that we're trying to achieve. Sometimes I don't talk enough about how we as leaders can really impact and drive high performing teams, create that intrinsic motivation, and really help to cultivate the type of culture that we want to create, for our teams, for our organization, and really how we deliver the types of products that we can feel proud of. And so sometimes, and if any of us have been around long enough, we know that there's a difference in the types of motivations historically that sometimes, organizations have brought. And that can be for a number of reasons. And I want to just talk about that really fast because I think there's a lot of negativity around certain types of leaders. And I really want to just bring back the human element into leadership. I saw a post the other day. There's like the right types of people versus the wrong types of people. I think it said something along the lines of promote the wrong leader and you lose the right people. There is so much that we all have to learn as we grow in our careers, in our leadership. And what brought us to a certain point won't always get us to the next level. And I've said that many times. When we feel anxiety or worry or pressure, that can start to manifest in us in a number of ways. And so that can lead to this kind of freak out mode and how we try to get our teams to go and do the things that we need them to do because maybe we're experiencing even added pressure from the top or from stakeholders, customers, different people. And so it's really about how do we manage that level of pressure? How do we manage the stress that we are under as a leader? How do we cultivate that regardless of what it is that we might be even facing? And so I want to make sure that I am really speaking to the fact that I think that leaders do have the best intent for the most part. If we're talking generically, right? I think everyone has the best intent. It's just how do we actually go about doing this and motivating people? And so intrinsic motivation is incredibly important because that's where we take people from, this kind of extrinsic motivation we're all familiar with fear or with maybe short-lived notoriety or some sort of maybe financial gain or something along those lines. Sometimes that might seem like the motivation to get someone to go and do something. But when we can have it internal and intrinsically, now they're operating from a place of joy, from passion, from desire. All of us perform and operate so much better, number one, when we feel like we are connected with what it is that we are doing. And we're also operating out of a place of clarity. When we are in a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn scenario, our brains are not as creative and innovative. So it doesn't really serve the organization to be operating and having people operating under that, type of motivation because we're not going to get the best that we can possibly get anyways. So a number of things to consider when we're thinking about teams is number one, how are our teams really working together? How are we creating an environment for our teams? How are they able to contract and co-create with one another? How are those team dynamics? And really taking that into account. Considerations are also, what are the team roles? Are they able to take on different roles? Do they have clearly defined roles? How are they operating within the team? Is there ambiguity around what it is that they're supposed to be doing, what they're an expert in? what they should be doing, showing up as, what's within their purview. Sometimes people operate out of fear because they don't want to step on toes. They don't want to look like they're taking over or doing the wrong thing. And so we see different types of responses for, depending on the individual, based on how they operate within those fear modes and mentalities, because not everyone operates in the same way. Not everyone responds to fear in the same way, which is why we have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And people show up in different ways. And so it can be really tricky as a leader to understand why they're behaving in a certain manner, or why we're struggling to get them to become motivated. And we have to maybe consider, what's that underlying fear that might be showing up for them, and how does that manifest for them in their lives? Which is why having psychological safety is incredibly important. And I know we're talking more and more about this. It's been around for a long time, but I notice within a lot of the calls that I'm having now with clients, organizations are having huge initiatives in relation to psychological safety. And so I've seen it defined a number of ways, but I really enjoy the definition from William Kahn, which is, having a sense of being able to show up and employ ourself without fear of negative consequences to our self-image, to our status, or to our career. So if we're thinking about how teams show up and how we challenge the status quo, how we create innovation, how we think through problems and deliver and execute, there needs to be a degree of psychological safety to even create what is being asked of us. Because if we are just heads down doing what we're told, we're not thinking creatively or innovatively. So the products and services that we're coming out with may not compete in the market in the way that we're hoping, because of the way that the organization is driving down the need to perform. As if we're really leaning into intrinsic motivation, which takes time, it takes effort, it takes more effort. But where the outcome, the return on investment for that effort is going to be greater, because you're going to see people changing the way that they approach the work that they're doing, and their willingness to go above and beyond for the product and services that you're creating. So it's incredibly important that they understand not only how do they do something, but what is it that they need to deliver? What are these key components that they're creating, and why? I would even, argue sometimes why, that's kind of this question that sometimes it's like, well, it doesn't matter the why. It definitely matters the why. Why are we creating something? What is it that I'm getting behind? What am I aligning myself with? How does it align with my core values? Everybody has an internal set of core values and non-negotiables that they need to be behind and to contract with. And so to understand that is incredibly important. So really having intrinsic motivation, is that doing of an activity for its inherent satisfaction rather than a separable consequence. And so when you're operating with your team, I want you to think about, what is the motivation behind this individual? What is the motivation behind the team as a whole? What is the motivation behind the organization? What are the things that we are truly trying to cultivate and create so that the team is operating at a high standard efficiently, and they can be that high performing, high creating team that we're looking to have? So Google's Project Aristotle, they took psychological safety and then they uncovered 4 additional key areas, right? So they uncovered dependability, so how you get things done on time, structure and clarity, so team members then having really clearly defined, roles and plans and goals. They uncovered meaning, what does the work mean to each individual? Can they tie it back to a personal motivator? And we'll get into mission a little bit. And then impact, what are the team members think that their work, do they think that their work matters? Is it creating greater change? I did a panel talk, I want to say 6 years ago, probably longer actually, maybe more like 8 years ago. And it was with a graduating class at that time. And it was interesting because one of the main things that kept coming up with that graduating class maybe 8 years ago was, I want to do work. This was the computer science department. I want to do work that's meaningful. I want to do work that brings value. I want to do work that is contributing to the greater whole of society. And I think this was we're seeing this dramatic shift in the way that everybody is starting to think about and approach work. It needs to have greater meaning and value and purpose for us individually in order for us to feel like we're putting effort out, we're making our mark in the world. And so maybe it's not on an individual level, but it has to have personal meaning. And so if we can align ourselves with teams and organizations and missions that are then in alignment with us, that's what we're seeing more and more is mattering to the generations that we're now working with. And I think that's incredibly important because it's not just about a paycheck, which is why I hear, like, well, how do I work with different team members who have different types of goals, where work-life balance might be important. And we're asking them to work longer hours and potentially weekends and greater overtime. Well, we have to get back to intrinsic motivation. Because if you are intrinsically motivated, if you are aligned with the mission and what it is that you're creating beyond just the paycheck, beyond just having the job, you will find that people are more willing to volunteer to do that level of work. But if there's punitive reinforcements, there isn't much motivation there. Fear will only take you so far, and then it will be a detriment to the organization. It will have a backfire. So it's really incredibly important that we're thinking about all of these things as a leader, is how we cultivate this. And so I think sometimes what we get stuck is like, I need to know how to do all these things. And as a leader, what you need to understand is, how do you create this ecosystem within your team even that's like a fine-tuned humming machine? Then that can start to branch out. So even if at the top, even if things that are external to you are not operating at that level, because I know it's not perfect, what can you do? And ask yourself, what can you do within your team? What can you do as a leader? What can you do individually? What kind of connections can you make? What kind of networking can you do within the company to start cultivating and creating the type of environment that will help your team to thrive, to feel like they are a part of something greater than themselves, that they are contributing to the greater good? Because all of this is what matters. This is what creates high performing teams. It's not the extrinsic motivation, it's the internal motivation. And so really how this can impact the team performance is, number one, if we're thinking about how we can coach our individual members, we're getting to know them in a deeper and more meaningful way. So if we can understand how you coach them in a one-on-one conversation within the team or the group setting, now you're able to really understand them at a deeper level. So you're bringing out their best. You are highlighting their strengths. You're understanding what their key interests are. And you're able to celebrate them as a team. And I really want to emphasize celebrating as a team efforts. I think it's great to celebrate individuals as well for their natural strengths. If you're doing it with everyone and you're doing it where it doesn't seem like there's some sort of favoritism, and you're also genuine. I've been a part of teams where the highlight was the notoriety, but it lacked the team dynamic. It lacked the team effort. And so when we find ourselves in organizations where we're rewarding individual achievements and individual efforts, what we find is a decrease in motivation from the rest of the team. And so then we start to see a separation between different types of individuals, because not everybody is going to approach problem solving in the same manner. Not everyone has the same emphasis on how they approach their work. And so if you're thinking about a natural strength as opposed to, did they perform in the way that you thought that they should? Did they stand out versus did they consistently show up? It makes a huge difference when we're celebrating the team as a whole and what their individual contributions are to the team effort. I think it's important to really highlight that, because I've seen that happen where, it's like, well, I have these rock stars and these superstars, and then I have others who, they're not performing as well. And we have to ask and analyze, why is that happening? Because I think we can all think that our team is operating well, but then, if we have an underperforming player, I would say usually it's not the individual, it's just how are they being utilized within the team that maximizes, number one, their strengths, and also motivates them to feel encouraged, to feel hopeful. And I think I've mentioned in, other conversations or lives that I've done, which is, our mind is always going to be more motivated by celebration and hope and feeling like we're doing a good thing than by fear. And that takes us back to childhood. It takes us back to all of these different responses within our system. So the more that we can lean into the positive within our team, the more that we can lean into how we celebrate their achievements and motivate them holistically, the more that we're going to start seeing people rising up. So it's interesting. I was looking up, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the Apollo 11 story with NASA, but in terms of teams, I was thinking about this is a really good example of teams operating really well, because it took 2 years or more of research just to study the moon's surface before they even started to implement, just so they understood, the conditions that they were going into. And it took over 400,000 people to create this achievement of landing on the moon, which required an incredible amount of dedication. And there was incredible collaboration, because they had scientists and engineers and technicians who had never worked in aerospace who were being asked to design a machine that was capable of transporting human life, right? And what they also started to do is they had human connection. We all need human connection in various ways. And so the astronauts would go and they would meet with the technicians and the engineers, and they would put a human face and emotion to what it is that they were needing to create, because they're putting their lives in their hands. But at the same time, it created meaning for those individuals, a greater meaning, a greater connection to what it was that they were doing, so that they felt invested emotionally into the success of the project. That led to greater communication. So even in the control room, as the flights, would go up, they would have those technicians and engineers in there talking to the people who were going out into space, making sure that everything was correct. That was the level of dedication that they had. And I would say that even belief, right? Belief is so important to how people show up. Do they believe in the cause? Do they believe in what it is that you're creating? Do they believe in the organization? Do they believe in your leadership? Do they believe that you will be there for them, even if they make a mistake? Because we all make mistakes. That's how we learn. But do they believe and trust you? So really establishing trust and belief, so imperative for creating success amongst your team. And I think that we can look at, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins and think that those were the heroes, but really Without those 400,000 people, without the team, without everybody collectively working together, it would never have happened. And so we really have to think about that. Like, how do we put emphasis on the right things for our teams? How do we harness that intrinsic motivation to a greater extent? And when we are owning stress and worry and anxiety, how do we build up our own personal resilience so that we can show up in the best way with integrity that we need for our team, and not just passing down the chain the same level of stress, worry, anxiety, and fear? It really comes down to, how do you one-on-one coach your team? How do you show up for your team members? How do you understand where it is that they want to take themselves? What do they really enjoy doing? What do they excel at doing? Understanding, their communication style, understanding where those little strengths are. Some, they might really love organizing little things that you might think aren't that big of a deal. But if you're thinking about how you delegate, maybe there's pieces in there where you can tap into different members of the team based upon their strengths, based upon their talents, based upon those little things that they enjoy. It's not always a one-to-one with the deliverable of a project. It could be even how they help you run a meeting. So really thinking about what are their interests, what are their goals, where do they want to see themselves heading, and working with them as a leader so that they feel that connection and trust and belief, knowing that you are the safety net, that they can't fail as long as you're in charge, right? If you're leading the team, which I really mean is like by supporting the team. And then really have that team contract. Teams can contract internally to understand what the team's mission is. What is the vision? What is the team's purpose? And how that, relates back to the stakeholders that they're serving. Peter Hawkins defines, a mission captures the company's ambition. A vision shows what it will be like when success is achieved. And purpose defines who the company serves and the value that it creates for them. You can do this within your own team and create that contract. You can create a creed. You can create methodologies for how team members will show up for each other. So regardless of what might be happening outside, because if you can't control that, you can still try to control what's happening within the ecosystem of your team as a leader, and how each team member shows up for each other and contracts with each other and believes in each other, which is why it's so incredibly important to understand and create really defined roles, understand how they can support each other, what their communication styles are, what those individual strengths are, so that everybody feels like they are contributing to the whole, not being left out, and really valued. When we're talking about remote teams quite often, there's so many ways that we can make remote teamwork happen and really gel. It's just that it's a different way of operating than we're used to. And so when I'm working with clients, we're talking about, okay, well, how do we bring a more dynamic team environment? Is the team more than just a meeting? How do we make this a connection, not just a status quo? So there's a lot more involved with how you create intrinsic motivation, but the reward is astronomical because it's going to benefit all the way up to the customer, to those stakeholders who are receiving and, using the product or service that's being created. So as a leader, it's really imperative that you're a thoughtful leader, that you're able to show up with authenticity, with integrity, with compassion and empathy, and really thinking about how you can serve your team and how you can effectively serve the organization, and together create that high performing, high creating value team, which is incredibly important for how we cultivate greatness for our teams, for ourselves, for our organizations, and our leadership, and what that really stands for as a leader. I'll be going live again on Wednesday, talking a little bit more about thoughtful leadership, authenticity, integrity, and personal purpose. But I appreciate you listening, taking some time with me today. I hope it was valuable for you just to think about a little bit. How are you showing up and creating that for your own team? How are you able to cultivate that and continue to drive in and create that ecosystem, that homeostasis that your team so needs in order for them to feel valued and do the things that are necessary to be successful? All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, please reach out. Write me in chat, DM, in comments, whatever. I'd love to hear from you and see if I can support you more. All right. Thank you.